In a recent piece you wrote in the Telegraph, you suggested that the Kremlin are terrified of Putin contracting the coronavirus. You argued this was because if Putin, being 67, being an at-risk group member, if he were to become very ill or even die, Russia could be exposed to a chaotic power struggle for the presidency precisely because no clear successor has ever been named or groomed or hinted at. So my question is, just how fragile is Putin's position? Does even the mere idea of him becoming sick raise the spectre of succession? Could force some elites to begin to consider a post-Putin Russia and therefore weaken his position as president?
I should say that the word terrified was something that was thrust upon me by the editors at the Telegraph. I wouldn't use that word. What I would say is that the Kremlin is incredibly aware of the difficult strategic and structural position that Putin is in. The reason why I wrote that piece was because it struck me that the Kremlin was putting out with notable frequency messages about the steps that were being taken to protect Putin. A very visual demonstration of that was when Putin visited a hospital near Moscow that was treating COVID-19 patients, and he dressed up in this yellow hazmat suit, and everybody was tweeting pictures about it. It was all over social media and then all over the press. It was a very vivid demonstration of the steps being taken by the Kremlin to protect Putin. And in a sense, that shouldn't be surprising. Governance continuity is key in any country. In any political regime of any type, there are going to be steps taken to protect the political leadership so that the country isn't left rudderless. However, what I thought and what I discussed in the piece for the Telegraph was that the message and the messaging was also really important. This was something that was being aimed not only at the Russian people, but also at the elite. The reason why the Kremlin was focusing this message on the elite is because in Russia, there really isn't a viable succession plan. According to Article 92 of the Russian Constitution, if the president is incapacitated, can't fulfill their duties, then the prime minister becomes acting president. In Russia, we know that things don't necessarily happen according to the black letter of the law of the Constitution. What's really important is the balance of power between elites. And it's not clear whether if Putin were to become incapacitated or even die, whether important elites in Russia would rally around Mikhail Mishustin, who's the current prime minister. I don't think we should be expecting a revolution or a coup imminently, and I don't think the Kremlin is thinking like that. But they are aware of the intense structural vulnerability of the Russian regime insofar as Putin hasn't groomed a particular successor, and there isn't a clear, viable, transparent succession plan. What's interesting at the moment with the coronavirus pandemic is that we see certain individuals rise prominently. So Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin has clearly seen his political star rise, and it's interesting to see how Putin is going to react to that. If sentiment on the street and within the elite says that Sobyanin has done a really good job and Putin hasn't, then it could be that Putin regards Sobyanin as some type of existential threat. And it would be interesting to see how the relationship between those two develops going forward.
Could you say a little bit more about the elites in Russia? Who exactly is it that Vladimir Putin has to keep on side to retain his position?
It's the type of question that we're not used to asking, and the Kremlin doesn't like people asking. They want to make it seem as though Putin is in control and everybody follows his lead. However, we do know that if Putin were to piss off a certain group of people or groups of people, then it would mean that his position would become increasingly untenable. So we would look at important business elites, important economic elites, people within law enforcement, people perhaps even within the military. But it's a difficult question to answer, precisely who Putin has to keep on board in order to stay in power, partly by design, because the Kremlin doesn't like people asking these questions. We might withdraw our support from Putin if he does this and this and this. The Kremlin makes it clear that there will be severe repercussions. To give a satisfying answer, it's not as if I would be able to give you a list. People try, and that's why you have these types types of initiatives and concepts like Politburo 2.0. But it's a really, really tricky question, and I'm afraid I don't have an easy answer. A list of 5 people who are the important key actors or sort of key groups within Russia that Putin needs to keep on board. We can often look at this question on an existential level, but Putin also needs to and is good at maintaining keeping a balance of power between different groups and a less existential level or sort of day-to-day policy level. He's good at balancing, say, different law enforcement groups. He's good at balancing different ministries. He's good at balancing different oligarchs. We can approach in different ways, both in relation to Putin and his survival and staying in power, but also in a more mundane level, the interest groups that he needs to keep happy on a day-to-day, month-by-month basis.
In some senses, his ability to manage those groups goes, I'm assuming, quite a long way to explaining his longevity and to explaining what he brings to the Russian presidency.
Definitely. One of the reasons why he's been in power now for more than 20 years is because he seems to be quite good. He seems to be a good political leader, knowing who has power, which different groups have power, who their enemies are, and acting as a bridge between them, but also maintaining the balance of power between them. He's also good at stopping potential rivals or successors emerging. So one of the reasons why we don't have a clear Putin 2.0 in the wings is because in Putin's mind, if somebody like that were to emerge, it could pose an existential threat to him, even though for the longevity of the regime more broadly, it would make sense for him to, say, groom a successor so that the system, the elite would know that if, say, he became ill or died, they could turn immediately to somebody else and the system wouldn't face an existential crisis. At the moment, we're not in that situation. Putin is prioritizing his everyday personal safety over the continued existence of the regime if he were somehow to get out of the picture.